Hello and welcome to this video. My name's Beckham. The subject here is Adobe Camera Raw. We're going to take the briefest look into the window where we're going to be spending quite a bit of time. I'm going to begin this video on Adobe Camera Raw by opening up Adobe's Bridge, which is what we can see here. Now, Adobe Camera Raw is quite a mouthful, so if you don't mind, I'm just going to abbreviate that to ACR while we're talking about this subject. So ACR is not a program that we can open independently of Photoshop or Bridge. Generally, ACR will open automatically when we select a raw file from within Bridge, or we choose to open a raw file from Photoshop. Now, I have a number of raw files showing as thumbnails here, and I'd like to draw your attention to the one with the green label. I've already opened this up into ACR, and I've done a little bit of editing which includes removing the color, and I've also made a small crop too. You'll notice that this image now has two small symbols at the top right of the thumbnail, and they tell us that the image has been edited and also cropped. Now, sometimes those edits may be obvious, and here I've taken away the color, so it is pretty obvious. But it's not always, so these symbols are very useful. So I'm going to open up the image that I've edited here into Adobe Camera Raw. If your screen looks something like this, what we can do, and what I generally do, is click this icon here. You can see what the tooltip says. It toggles it to full screen mode. Gives us as much space as we need, I think. Now, this image has been edited, and we can tell that by just looking at all the changes in these sliders. If this was a basic raw file untouched, all those sliders would be down the middle. And of course, I've already mentioned that I've cropped the image. Now, it isn't unusual for me to edit an image and then at some stage in the future I want to reset those edits. Now, we can do that from within Camera Raw here. We go up to the top right of the panel just below the histogram and click. A number of options open up. The one we want is right down the bottom, Reset Camera Raw Defaults. There you can see the image jumps back to its original status. All of the sliders are all in line. The one thing that doesn't do though is remove the crop. To do that, I'd need to come to the crop tool, click it. That reveals the crop that I originally made. Then I can hit the escape key, and then the crop is removed. Now, as you can see here, I've opened up another picture from that set. Sometimes if we're just beginning a manipulation, it's not unusual, I think, to do a little bit of experimentation, so we may tweak a number of sliders. Let's bring down the whites, let's put up clarity, let's put up color. All I'm doing here is to simulate the fact that sometimes we can actually adjust quite a number of options, and of course we've got lots of tabs and we could have made changes there too. But this image hasn't been opened in Photoshop yet. I haven't hit the Done button at the bottom right. So if I wanted to revert this back to its original, I can just touch the Alt key. And if you look down at the bottom right of the screen, you'll notice the Cancel button changes to a reset. And when I click it, we're back to Camera Raw Defaults. As we go through the videos and we start to do quite a bit of work in ACR, you will notice quite a number of similarities between this and Photoshop. So if you learn a shortcut in Photoshop, there's a fair bet it's going to work perfectly here. One of the examples of that is the zoom tool. If I go to the zoom at the top left of the screen and double click, the image is opened up to 100%. I can hit Ctrl+0 and reset the picture back within the screen, and I can right click the picture and I can jump to any setting that I require. Ctrl+0 once again will bring it back and fit it on screen, but also double click in the hand tool, which is exactly the same in Photoshop. On the top bar we do have a little icon that takes us to Camera Raw Preferences. Now the very first option here is one that says, where do you want to save the image settings? Do you want them in a Camera Raw database, or do you want them as sidecar files? I think by default sidecar files are set, so you can see that I've already changed mine to Camera Raw database. Whenever we apply any editing changes to a raw file in ACR, when we open the image up into Photoshop, or if we click the Done button right down in the bottom right corner of the screen, then all of the changes we've made to that image will be stored in what's called an XMP file. Now I think for most people Camera Raw database is going to meet all of your needs, because while you're working on one PC, then the images and the XMP data are both on the same PC. If you ever open the raw file up again in the future, it's going to read that data and reapply the changes you last left the image with. Now the sidecar files are saved alongside the image, so if you had a partially worked image on your computer and then you wanted to take it to a friend's house to complete the editing, then you need to save the image settings in sidecar files, so that when you copy the image to a USB stick to transport it from computer to computer, the XMP data goes with the image. It won't do that if you've got Camera Raw database set, but I think if you're just using one computer and you rarely take partially created images from computer to computer, then Camera Raw database is probably going to be for you. There's no other changes I want to draw your attention to in this panel, so I'm just going to click OK. But I do want to go down to the center bottom of the screen to a hyperlink we have here, and I'm going to click to open that up. This is our workflow options. The first option I'd like to draw your attention to is the color space. This is the default setting, Adobe RGB 1998. Now I usually leave that set, but I have the color settings in Photoshop set up so that anything I open from Camera Raw will be converted to sRGB, because I do most of my work on screen. But if I was at one stage wishing to do a high quality print and I wanted to retain the Adobe RGB, then it's a quick and simple setting change. Generally in the color depth it will be set by default to 8, and I would suggest take advantage of 16-bit processing. The only other area that I would like to draw your attention to is the one down here. It says open in Photoshop as a smart object. It's not normally ticked as a default, so I've been in and already ticked that. I've got this subject covered in much more depth in another video called Smart Objects in ACR. So for now I can click OK. Now we're going to better understand the tools up at the top left as we go through the videos and projects later. But perhaps I can quickly mention the zoom tool again. I have said that double clicking it will take the image to 100%, and that's going to be quite useful. And I've also said that if we use the hand tool, if I double click the zoom, 100%, and if I double click the hand tool, it takes it back down. Now a few of the tools along the top of the screen up on the left here, when we select them, and I'll just select my adjustment brush, if you look over on the right hand side, all the tabs that we normally choose from, these ones along the top here just below the histogram, they all disappear. So let's assume that I've used the brush and I've made some changes. If I want to go back to those tabs again, a nice quick and easy way to do so is to select the hand tool, but rather than going right up the top to the top left of the screen, just touch the H key on the keyboard. That selects the hand tool, and as you can see on the right, it brings back all of the tabs, because it's likely we're going to need one of those next. Let me apply a couple of changes here. I'll just take the saturation away and I'll give a healthy slug of dehaze and a bit of brightness. Let's assume we were working around this image in Adobe Camera Raw. We have a number of options down the bottom here to be able to view the image. Let's start with the one on the extreme left here. We can either click the icon or we can touch the Q key on the keyboard. And what it does, it gives us a before and after. But if I touch the Q key again, then you can see it scrolls them around and just gives us the same sort of view but slightly different. And once again, and finally back to where I started. But we can do that by clicking the icon too. Now my favourite is the next option, which is represented by the letter P on the keyboard, and as you can see, by touching that I can toggle from the before and after. So when we're making changes to the image, especially if they're subtle changes, sometimes it's nice to be able to just jump from one to the other and just see if the changes we've input are the ones we want to stay with. The next option allows you to copy the changes from one to the other. To be honest, I find it more confusing than of any help. Now the last option can be useful because when we're talking about touching the P key, the P key will use a before and after, but it will be your immediately previous settings. If you'd done a lot and opened the image up and came back in and went back out and came back in, then at some stage you're just going to toggle backwards and forwards between the last two settings you made, not the original image. But if you want to toggle from the image you've created, let me hit my P key again, but go back to the original raw file, then you need this option at the far right. That will take you back right to the original. Now I'm aware that sometimes when we're doing these overview of the screens we're about to use, they can be a little bit on the boring side, not quite as exciting as when we're actually getting involved in a project. So one quick last thing. We can move all of these sliders, and we've already looked at how we can reset them. But if you've just got one or two sliders set and you want to quickly return those, if you double click the pointer on any of the sliders, it will snap back to its default position. Now I must admit, I always have a dilemma when I'm dealing with subjects like this, an overview of a screen we're going to be using. Because on the one hand there's a view that says leave all of that and pick up the information with practical projects, but the other side of the argument says that if you were teaching someone to drive, there are some controls and things you need to point out before you leave the curb. So I think this is one of those videos where the user can decide whether they want to step past it or not. But of course, if you're listening to me now, you probably didn't.